Say the word out loud. Diesel. You have heard it 1,000 times, printed on engines and fuel pumps, on the sides of trucks and ships and trains all over the world. It is one of the most common words on the planet. But it is not really a word at all. It is a man's name. And his story ends in one of the strangest mysteries of the 20th century. A brilliant, ruined inventor who walked onto a ship one autumn night and simply vanished into the sea. Some people change the world, and the world never learns their name. This is without whom. His name was Rudolf Diesel. He was born in Paris in 1858, the son of poor immigrants from Germany. He was a delicate, brilliant boy who loved museums and machines. But when war broke out between France and Germany, his family was driven from the country, suddenly penniless, and the frightened boy was sent away across Europe to finish his schooling in a strange land. He grew into one of the finest engineering students his school had ever seen. And there, one idea seized him and would not let go. The great steam engines that powered the modern world in every factory and ship and railway were astonishingly wasteful, throwing away almost all of their fuel as useless heat. Most people simply accepted this. The young man could not. He set out to build an engine that wasted almost nothing. It became the dream of his life. He imagined an engine so efficient it would not need mountains of coal, small and cheap enough that an ordinary craftsman, a baker or a blacksmith, could own one and stand on his own against the great steam-powered factories. To him, it was not only a machine. It was a way to set the little man free. His idea was bold to the point of madness. Instead of using a spark to light the fuel, he would squeeze the air inside the engine so hard, so violently, that it grew hot enough to make the fuel burst into flame all on its own. On paper, the physics promised astonishing power. In practice, it meant building a machine that could survive pressures and heat that could tear iron apart. For years, he labored over it, backed at last by powerful industry, working in a great machine works in Germany. He filled notebooks with calculations. He built his engine, tested it, watched it fail, and built it again. He was chasing forces no engine had ever been asked to contain. And one day, those forces nearly killed him. As he ran an early version of the engine, it exploded, shattering apart and very nearly taking him with it. He survived. And rather than frighten him off, the blast proved his point. The pressures inside were every bit as ferocious as he had promised. He picked himself up and kept building. Then, after years of failure, it ran. In 1897, his engine roared to life and did exactly what he had sworn it would. It was more than twice as efficient as the finest steam engines on Earth. Engineers who came to watch could hardly believe their eyes. The impossible machine worked, and this time, the world was watching. Then came something stranger still. At a great world fair, a diesel engine was shown running not on petroleum, but on oil pressed from peanuts. His invention, he realized, could burn almost anything. And he dreamed of a future where farmers grew their own fuel from plants, where even the poorest nations could power themselves from their own fields. He had built something far ahead of its time, and he knew it. And he was right. Look around you now. Nearly every ship that crosses the oceans, almost every truck on every highway, the trains, the vast machines that move the food and goods of the entire human race, all of them run on his engine. The modern world is stitched together by the thing he built. Without it, global trade as we know it simply stops. His engine, quite literally, moves the world. But genius and good fortune do not always travel together. As his engine spread across the earth, it brought him endless trouble. Rivals attacked his patents. Early engines, sold too soon, broke down and came back, and angry customers blamed him. He spent years in courtrooms and boardrooms instead of workshops, defending what he had made, while other men grew rich upon it. And he was, it turned out, a far better engineer than he was a businessman. He poured his money into ventures that collapsed. He sank a fortune into a doomed oil scheme that failed completely. He built himself a grand and costly house, and quietly, year by year, the famous inventor whose name was on engines all over the world was sliding toward ruin. By the autumn of 1913, the truth was desperate. Behind the proud public face, his bank accounts were nearly empty, and he owed sums he could not possibly pay. Crushing debts were about to come due. The man whose invention was making other men rich was himself almost broke, and very near the end of his rope. That September, he boarded a steamer in a port in Belgium, bound across the sea for London. He was to meet about his business, and, some say, to talk with the British Navy about powering their submarines with his engine. He ate a pleasant dinner. He spoke calmly with his companions. Then, near 10 o'clock, he went to his cabin and asked to be woken at 6:15 in the morning. But when morning came, his cabin was empty. His bed had not been slept in. His nightshirt lay neatly folded, his watch placed carefully where he could see it from the bed. And out on the deck, tucked beneath a railing above the dark water, they found his hat and his overcoat, laid down with terrible care. Rudolf Diesel was gone. He had vanished into the night and the sea. 10 days later, in the cold, gray waters off the Dutch coast, the crew of a passing boat found a body adrift, so ravaged by the water that no face remained. In the rough weather, they could not bring it aboard, so they took only the small things from its pockets and let the sea keep the rest. Later, his own son looked at those few belongings: a pill case, a spectacles case, a pocket knife, and knew them at once. They had been his father's. And so the questions began, and they have never stopped. Had the ruined inventor, facing disgrace and debt, stepped quietly off that deck into the dark? In his diary, beside that day, someone had drawn a single small cross. Or was it something darker? He was carrying secrets that a great military empire did not want handed to its enemies. More than a century later, no one knows for certain what happened in that black water. The case has never been closed. His grieving family found little but debt. And in a cruel irony, the world soon forgot his gentlest dream. His vision of clean fuel grown from plants was brushed aside, as his engine was wedded instead to cheap and plentiful petroleum, the very thing that now darkens our skies. The machine survived and conquered. The man's deeper hopes for it sank with him. Yet his name endures, on a billion engines, spoken in every language on earth, though hardly anyone who says it remembers there was ever a man behind it, a delicate boy driven from his home, a dreamer who longed to free the common worker, a genius who built the beating heart of the modern world, then walked into the sea and into mystery, his debts unpaid and his greatest dream unfulfilled. So the next time you see that word on a fuel pump or a passing truck, remember it was once a man, brilliant and haunted, who gave us the engine that moves the world, and whose own end we will likely never fully know. The world you live in was built by people you have never heard of. And now, you know one more name: Rudolf Diesel. Like and subscribe and stick around, because the textbooks left a lot out. Thanks for watching.